Chapter 1. Roses and Rumors. In Marleycombe, the roses had bloomed early in Marleycombe that year, and the villagers, true to their nature, saw it as both a blessing and a warning. It's a blessing, for the annual Garden Society tour would display its prize roses in full glory. A warning, for in England, beauty often hid some subtle rot. Marleycombe seemed to float in a bubble of timeless charm, red brick cottages with ivy-strangled chimneys, winding footpaths through primrose and meadowgrass, the faint scent of baking bread on every corner. Gossip here was like steam off a kettle, warm, constant, inescapable. Miss Marple had returned to Marleycombe for the summer. Her own village, St. Mary Mead, held mysteries enough for a lifetime. She knew truth, folly, and the occasional death trailed human nature more closely than geography. Marleycombe, with its perfect hedges and secrets behind lace curtains, was no exception. She had arrived days earlier, staying with her distant cousin, Millicent Braithwaite, in a charming cottage called Honeysuckle Row. Millicent, with her usual breathless zeal, had invited her for the garden tour, insisting Jane must see the Wardens. Hope rose, planted by Lord and Lady Marbury at their estate's edge. It only blooms when it wants to, Millicent had said, voice near reverent. And this year, Jane, it's bloomed as if it knew it would be watched. Miss Marple smiled now at the memory, walking the crushed shale path of Marbury House, with her cousin, surrounded by neighbors and guests clutching tour brochures and cups of weak lemonade. The garden was a riot of color and scent dahlias bursting in rows, foxgloves nodding like old men in conversation, and the roses, oh, the roses. Lord Marbury, in his habitual Panama hat, stood by the ornamental pond, discussing lawn drainage with Reverend Beckwith. Dr. Lionel Colgrave, a young man with furrowed brows and a mustache he hadn't yet grown into, walked alone near the conservatory, hands in pockets, observing all. Mrs. Alice Copeland, twice widowed, laughed too loudly at a retired colonel's whispered remark. The garden shimmered in sunlight, deceptively still, until it wasn't. A scream brittle, awful, the kind that doesn't seem real until people move toward. It shattered the calm. Miss Marple turned, not with panic, but with the sharp clarity of one who had heard such screams before, signaling something irrevocably wrong. The sound came from beyond the rose arch near the gazebo. A crowd formed, hesitant, then thickening as curiosity overrode etiquette. Millicent clutched Miss Marple's arm, a chain that came from the rose garden. Kay, Miss Marple quickened, her pace weaving through garden chairs and ornamental borders. Past the white trellis, she saw the source, a body sprawled among the rose beds, face tilted skyward, eyes unseeing. Rose petals clung to the grass like spilled wine. One bloom crushed beneath the man's shoulder, its stem bent awkwardly. Someone gasped, another whimpered. Dr. Colgrave knelt beside the man, touched his neck, felt for a pulse, then looked up, shaking his head. Dead, he said quietly. He's gone. Millicent covered her mouth. Is that Mr. Bartlett from the antique shop? It was. George Bartlett, balding, slide, always with the air of a man holding something back, lay motionless in Lord Marbury's prized garden, his final breath lost among the thorns. He wasn't even on the guest list. Someone murmured. Miss Marple said nothing. She looked at the man's shoes, muddy Adgaven. The garden paths were dry. His collar was torn slightly at the seam, as though something had tugged at it before he fell. A thin, jagged scratch marked his jawline. The police hadn't yet arrived, but they would soon, and they would no doubt look for the obvious, a thief, a scuffle, a jealous lover, or some stranger had wandered where they didn't belong. But Miss Marple knew something certain, but something instinctual, the way one knows a kettle's about to boil by the subtle hiss before the whistles. George Bartlett had secrets, and Marley, for all its pleasantness, did too. She turned to Millicent and spoke softly. "Would you mind terribly if I stayed a bit longer than planned?" Millicent blinked. "Oh no, of course not, Jane. Yak no. You're welcome, as long as you like." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Good," said, "because I believe Marley Combe is about to become rather interesting chapter." To the man who died among the roses, the police arrived just past noon, full 25 minutes after George Bartlett had been pronounced dead. The constable from Marley Combe, a stocky man named Edwards with a thick mustache and a tendency to sweat when flustered, had cordoned off the garden with borrowed bunting from the garden Sozidi. It fluttered absurdly in the breeze, bright pink against the sombriality. By then, the news had spread like spilled tea on linen. Murder in Marley Combe was whispered in corners, behind gloves, into coat collars by the time Inspector Vane arrived from Basingfold in a plain black motor car. Half the village had reshuffled their afternoon plans to stay near the estate, as if proximity might grant them insight or gossip. Writes Inspector Vane was tall, lean, and quietly weary in the way of men who had seen too much and been thanked too little. His suit was pressed, but his eyes looked as though they'd slept in too many odd places. He nodded at Constable Edwards, looked once at the body, then turned to the gathered crowd. "No one leaves," he'd said, not unkindly but firmly. "Everyone here today will give a statement." There were immediate murmurs of coarse protests from Lady Marbury, confusion from the Reverend, sharp gasps from a few of the younger women who had just realized they might be considerate specks. Miss Marple remained seated on a small iron bench by the roses, her hands folded over her bag, as calm as if she were waiting for the vicar's Somanto began. Inspector Vane approached her last. She had been watching him quietly, noting how avoided looking directly at the body more than necessary. That often meant a man was good at his job. He didn't need to gawk at the tragedy to understand its weight. "Miss Jane Marple?" he asked. She nodded. "That's right, from see, Mary, me, you understand. You were among the first to see the body." "Yes, though Dr. Colgrave wasn't ahead of me. I imagine he was nearest when the scream was heard." "Did you hear anything strange before the scream, miss?" Marple thought only the usual chatter. "People nearing roses, I noticed." Reverend Beckwith, in animated conversation with Lady Elena Hargrave, just a few minutes before the inspector made a brief note. "And Mr. Bartlett, do you know if he was invited?" She shook her head. "Highly unlikely. Mr. Bartlett wasn't well liked in social circles, charming on the outside, but always a little enterprising in ways that didn't inspire tryst, such as he once sold a chair to Lady Harav for £80 and claimed it was Elizabethan. It was from a hotel in Brighton. Found out, of course." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Did he have enemies?" Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Dear Inspector, this is a village. Everyone has enemies. Most are just subtle about it." He allowed himself the trace of a smile and jotted down more notes behind them. A forensic officer from Basingfold, judging by his dark blue bag, crouched over the body with gloves and careful fingers. George Bartlett's face had lost all its color. A sliver of crimson had dreed along his lower lip. The position of his arms was unnatural. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, no weapon lying nearby. "How did he die?" someone whispered. "There's not even any blood, miss." Marple didn't respond, but she was thinking the same. Sudden death in a healthy man, no visible wounds, a scratching, the neck. It suggested poisoning, or perhaps a sharp blow to the back of the head. But there had been no time for such an attack. No one had seen it, and yet he was dead by early afternoon. All guests were individually questioned. Most had nothing to offer. No one had seen Bartlett Aravano. One had spoken to him. Some even claimed they hadn't known he was there at all. It was as if he had stepped into the garden simply to die. Miss Marple, sipping tea now in the Marbury conservatory, looked out at the rose beds thoughtfully. She knew the village well enough to see what wasn't said. Reverend Beckwith had shaken visibly. When questioned, Lady Hargrave had refused to speak with anyone except her solicitor. Dr. Colgrave had seemed distracted, almost irritated, not at the crime, but at the PA militant, had cried, not for the deceased, but because she was certain the tragedy would ruin her new hat. It was as though every person had brought with them Downey's small storm, and George Bartlett, she suspected, had merely stepped into the eye of it. Do you think it's someone we know? Millicent asked in a whisper. Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted her shawl and looked toward the distant gazebo. There was a scuff in the gravel path near its base, half covered now by Inspector Vane's boots. Sure, a kind of Mark Madwin. Someone had stopped suddenly or turned back. I think, she sagely, that this murder, if it is a murder, began long before today. This rose garden was only the final stage. Then what was the beginning? Miss Marple's gaze didn't shift. That's what I intend to find out. Chapter 3, Tea Lies. And an unopened letter. That evening, Marley seemed unusually still. Even the birds held back their evening songs, as if mourning the shattered peace that now hung like folk across the village. Windows that were usually flung open to let in the last of the day sunshine were closed curtains. Twitched teapots, satin-couched at Honeysuckle Row. Miss Marple and Millicent Braithwaite sat in the drawing room, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound between them for a long while. Do you think it really was murder? Millicent asked. Not for the first time. She had a nervous habit of brushing invisible crumbs from her skirt. Once unsettled, and her hands were working again now. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. I rather think it was, but George Bartlett wasn't important or even very well liked. All the more reason to look closer. Miss Marple said calmly. When someone prominent is killed, it's often political or professional. But when it happens to someone ordinary, well, it's usually very personal. Millicent's brow furrowed. But who would want to murder him? He was just the antique dealer. He didn't even go to the Women's League's Christmas party last year, which upset Mrs. Copeland terribly, Miss Marple noted. Oh, you don't think she, Miss Marple, shook her head. No, but Mrs. Copeland was certainly close to him in her way. You remember she gifted him that horribly Brazilian dog last year. Millicent winced with the red eyes. Hideous thing. He pewed it right in the shop window and removed it 2 days later. They were silent again. Marley comb, Miss Marple thought, was like a lace doily, lovely from a distance, but full of holes. When held up to the light, beneath its layers of garden teas and vicarage sermons were generations of tangled foods, alliances, favors, owed and never returned. Mr. Bartlett, for all his charm and petty dishonesty, had been part of that web, and someone somewhere in that web had snapped. Just then there was a knock at the door. Millicent jumped, then frowned. At this hour, it was nearly 7, and dusk had settled outside like a velvet cloth. Miss Marple stood first. Let's see, whoa. It is at the door stood a slight woman in a sensible skirt suit, her hair pinned back in a loose bun. She was in her early 30s, though her face looked older from worry. She held her hand bag tightly, like a shield. Miss Marple. It's kissed. Yes, I'm Vera March. I work at the solicitor's office. I was hoping he might speak with you privately. Miss Marple opened the door wider. Come in, Miss March. We've just put the kettle on. Vera sat stiffly, refusing the biscuit plate, but accepting tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat, cup down. I wasn't sure who else to talk to, she said. You. Have a reputation not that I believe in gossip, but people say you notice things miss. Marple nodded dance. I do try. Vera glanced toward the window, as if afraid someone might be watching. I came because of something found in Mr. Bartlett's papers. Miss Marple didn't react visibly, but she lowered her knitting. I thought he had no family. He didn't, but he'd hired our office a few weeks ago to help sort out some legal concerns. He'd recently bought a property on the edge of the village, the old mill house. Curious. Miss Marple murmured. No one mentioned that. No one knew he bought it under a different name. George Martin, he told Mr. Elliott, our senior partner, that he need dead privacy. What exactly? That's the thing we don't know. But he did leave Elliott sealed to be opened only in the event of his sudden death. Millicent gasped softly. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. And has it been opened? Vera hesitated. Yes, Mr. Ellicott gave it to Inspector Vane this afternoon. Did he mention what was in it? Vera's eyes flicked. Downey wouldn't tell me exactly, but I saw his face when he read it. He looked surprised, not afraid, but very serious. And where is Mr. Ellicott? Now, he left for London this evening. Family emergency. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed just a little. I just thought, if anything should happen to me, I'd want someone like you looking into it, Vera added, her voice softer now. Miss Marple nodded. Thank you for trusting me. You've done the right thing. After Vera left, Miss Marple walked slowly back to her seat and looked out the window. The moon had risen, casting a faint silver glow across Marlium. Somewhere in that glow, someone was watching, waiting, hoping the truth would stay buried. But it never did. Not for a long chapter. Fort Vickers, strangest lens. By the next morning, Marleycombe had shed its usual serenity and replaced it with something tighter, thinner, like a smile stretched too far. Though the village green was still trimmed and the bakery still sold its jam tarts at 10, there was an edge to every greeting and a pause behind every glance. Miss Marple had always said, a murder in a village is like a needle dropped on carpet. It doesn't vanish, it waits for someone's foot. She walked into the post office that morning, not for letters but information. That was the true purpose of many visits in Marleycombe, where the post, Mistress Clara Fenimore, knew more about the village than any dear newspaper ever could. Clara was wiping the brass counter when Miss Marple entered. A large woman with a fondness for navy cardigans and opinions she gave Miss Marple a brief nod, followed by a narrowing of her eyes. Morning, Miss Marple. Good morning, Clara. I suppose you've come to heart latest. Miss Marple smiled politely, only to collect a catalog, but I never mind a bit of news. Clara leaned forward, her voice dropping. Inspector Baines, still questioning everyone, had Reverend Beckwith in his office for nearly an hour this morning. Indeed said it was just routine, but the Reverend didn't look too comfortable. Left looking like he'd just swallowed the wrong communion wine. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Do you think he's involved? Clara sniffed the Reverendo. He's not the type for murder, but secrets, that's another story. Clara's source dropped lower. They say Mr. Bartlett visited the vicarage. It's 2 nights spur for the garden tour. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the postcard rack beside the counter. Now that is interesting. He wasn't exactly a man off fate, was he? He wasn't. That's what makes it so odd. Vicar never mentioned it to anyone. Why invite a man like Bartlett into the vicarage? And at night, Miss Marple didn't answer, but she was already forming the next step of her morning. 10 minutes later, she walked down the sunlit lane that led toward the vicarage. The gate was open, not usual for Reverend Beckwith, a man who took care to latch everything. She rapped gently on the door and was answered almost at once. Reverend Beckwith was a tall, soft-spoken man in his 50s, known for sermons that often went 10 minutes longer than they should, and for never raising his voice even when children scuffed the pews. But this morning, he looked pale, more so than usual, and a little uncertain. Miss Marple, what a surprise. I do hope not interrupting. I wondered if you might have a moment. He hesitated visibly, before stepping aside, of course. Please come in. She was shown into a sitting room with dark mahogany furniture, and a faint smell of old books. Tea was offered but declined. I'll be brief, she said, kindly. I've heard you were one of the last people to see Mr. Bartlett before he died. The vicar stiffened, his fingers tightening around the chair arm. Who told you that? Let's say it was murmured on the breeze. He sighed, then looked down at his shoes. Yes, it's true. He came to see me Thursday night, unannounced to her. He said we Beckwith hesitated again. He was agitated, nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. He said he had something he wanted to confess, but not of a spiritual nature. Then why come to you? I think he didn't know who else to trust. Miss Marple waited, letting the silence do its work. Finally, the vicar continued. He told me he'd made a mistake, a serious one, that someone had discovered it. He said he feared for his life. Miss Marple frowned. And you didn't tell anyone? He begged me not to. He said he was going to set things right. I thought stopped, ashamed. I thought he was just being dramatic. He was always theatrical. He named the mistake. Beckwith shook his head. Only hinted, he said. I thought I was being clever, but they were cleverer. And did he say who they were? No. She studied the man a moment longer. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands fidgeted constantly. I didn't believe you, she said finally. But if you remember anything else, even the smallest detail, please let me know. Beckwith nodded. Miss Marple, do you think he was really murdered? Cherise, gently, I think a man doesn't die among roses without someone nearby who planted something far more dangerous than thorns. As she left, the vicarage, the sun broke through a brief cloud, and Miss Marple turned toward the old millhouse seat, the edge of the village. She had remembered what Vera Marr had said about it. Bartlett had bought it under a false name. If someone had discovered that secret before he died, they might. Alsahave wanted to ensure he never revealed anything further. Chapter 5. Shadows at Themel's house. The millhouse sat at the village's edge where the cobbled road gave way to wild hedger and untamed fields. It had long been abandoned before George Bartlett bought it under Thelius. George Martin. Miss Marple had never been inside, but she had seen it from a distance, an aging stone structure. Ivy crawling up one side windows, staring blankly like hollow eyes. The village called it the ghost house, though there were no stories of spirits, only silence and rumors of its original owner appearing decades ago without a trace. Early the next morning, Miss Marple found herself standing at the wrought iron gate. Now, slightly ajar, the gravel crunched beneath her sensible shoes as she stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She was joined shortly by Inspector Vane, who had heard of her interest and deemed it wise to accompany her despite his reserve. His gaze softened as he surveyed the neglected building, been empty for years. He said, Bartlett must have wanted complete privacy or hiding. Miss Marple replied as sharp. That's often the same thing. Inside the millhouse was a time capsule of dust and shadows. Wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, broken shutters rattled in the breeze, yet here and there were signs of recent life. A hastily folded newspaper on the kitchen table, a half-empty teacups, dammed with lipstick, and a small brass key sitting atop an unopened wooden box. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the key with deliberate care. Curious, she murmured. Inspector Vane cleared his throat. What do you make of all this? I think, she said, that Mr. Bartlett had secrets deeper than any garden bed. They moved to the back room, where sunlight barely filtered through grimy panes. On a battered desk lay an envelope addressed in careful handwriting. Chilb, opened only upon my death. It must be the letter Vera March spoke of vain sadness. Marple nodded and carefully unfolded the brittle paper. Inside the handwriting was George's neat but rushed, "To whomever finds this, I have lived a life of half-truths and shadows. There are those in Marley. It's why I would kill to keep what I know buried. The mill house holds more than dust and marmas. It holds evidence. Look where the rose blooms the brightest, and Yah will find the key. Beware those who smile in sunlight, for it is in darkness they move." GB. Inspector Vane frowned a warning and a riddle. "Precisely," Miss Marple said softly, "and one we must heed outside the village," stirred with suspicion and fear. But inside the mill house, two quiet figures beset each other, the threads of a mystery that ran deeper than a single rose bed and far darker than any blossom. Chapter 6. Secrets beneath petals. Back in the garden at Marple Manor, the vibrant blooms that had seemed so inviting the day before now felt like silent witnesses to a dark truth. Miss Marple and Inspector Vane returned to the rose garden with renewed purpose. The letters mention of the rose that blooms the brightest lingered in her mind, setting a subtle but sharp focus on that part of the grounds the warden's hope rose, already renowned for its early, vibrant bloom, stood proudly near the old stone gazebo. It was here that George Bartlett's life's body had been found, surrounded by petals and thorns, a grim tableau, framed by boding. Miss Marple knelt beside the rose bush, her fingers tracing the leaves and stems carefully, as though coaxing secrets from the earth itself. Inspector Vane watched, silent but alert. "Do you think this rose is significant beyond the obvious?" He asked. "Everything in a murder mystery is significant," she replied softly. "Bartlett's letter hints at evidence hidden. Where the rose blooms, we must look beneath." With the help of Constable Edwards, they gently began to clear away leaves and undergrowth around the base of the bush. The air was thick with the scent of earth and petals, but also a faint hint of something metallic, faint but unmistakable at their half. Buried beneath loose soil lay a small, rusted tin box. Miss Marple looked carefully, brushed away dirt and debris before lifting the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellow paper, were several folded documents and a tiny velvet pouch. Unfolding one of it, the papers revealed a ledger meticulously handwritten, detailing transactions that stretched back several years. Minion trees were innocuous antique sales, minor loans, but others referenced sums of money paid to names familiar in the village. There were payments to a Mershar grave and notes about settling debts, quietly sung. Entries were marked with initials A. The ledger told a story of financial impotence, hush money, and quiet blackmail. Miss Marple's eyes, narrow width, goes far beyond petty theft or village gossip. From the velvet pouch, she withdrew a small, ornately carved key, too delicate for any door in Marley, but suggestive of something locked away, perhaps a diary or a safe. Deposit box. Inspector Vane flipped through the ledger with a furrowed brow. If Bartlett kept this here, where it could be found only upon his death, then he knew danger was close. Miss Marple stood and gazed toward the stone gazebo shadows, lengthening with the afternoon sun, and I believe he intended this to be found by someone he trusted, someone who would understand. The question is, who? As Desky darkened and a sudden breeze stirred the rose petals, a single petal drifted Danto. The ledger's pages like a silent reminder that every secret in Marlacom is entwined with its people, its past, and the roses that bloomed so beautifully, yet hid so much. Chapter 7. Whispers and Thipolor. That evening, the village's usual quiet was broken by the soft murmur of voices inside the Mari estate's drawing room. Miss Marple had been invited to TB Lady Elenina Hargrave, who was determined to maintain an appearance of calm and control in the wake of recent events. The grand parlor was adorned with heavy drapes, ornate wallpaper, and portraits of fancisters who seemed to watch over the gathering with stern eyes. A fire crackled low in the heart, and a silver tea service gleamed on the polishable Lady Ilalanina. Her expression, carefully composed, but tinged with faded poured steaming tea with practiced grace, she had an air of dignity, tempered by animistical tension. "Jane," she said softly as Miss Marple settled into a velvet armchair, "this dreadful business has unsettled everyone, yet I believe we must keep our wits about us." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze steady into truth, has a way of emerging, no matter how carefully one might try to bury it. As they spoke, the room's door opened quietly, and Lionel Colgrave Interredis, usually impassive face, bore a shadow of worry that deepened as he approached Lady Hargrave. He greeted, then turned to Miss Marple. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Dr. Lady Elanina said, gesturing to a chair. "Please join us." The three settled into an uneasy conversation. Colgrave, the village's new doctor, was younger than most. His scientific mind, a contrast to the old-world traditions of Marley Comb's elite. He was precise in speech, but rarely revealed more than necessary. "I've been reviewing Mr. Bartlesmickle's history," Colgrave began, "and while there's nothing remarkable, his recent health records show a troubling pattern of anxiety and irregular heart rhythms that could suggest chronic stress." Miss Marple sipped her tea. "Stress can be a powerful enemy indeed," Colgrave agreed, "and if Bartlett feared for his life, as the Reverend said, that might explain it." Lady Elanina pursed her lips. "But who would want him dead?" "Someone connected to these financial dealings," Miss Marple said, her mind returning to the ledger. "I've seen payments to certain village residents that suggest blackmail or bribery." Conversation grew more strained when Millicent Braithwaite was announced, the energetic cousin of Miss Marple. Her presence brought a slight lift to Theron's atmosphere, though even she could not entirely mask the underlying tension. "I hear the police are still at the mill house," Millicent said, setting down her handbag. "Have they found anything new?" "Only more questions," Miss Marple replied, "but sometimes questions are more valuable." The Nanswares, as the group discussed. A faint knock interrupted them. A young woman entered. Hesitantly, Vera March, the solicitor's clerk, who had confided in Miss Marple lawyer. She held a small envelope, which she handed discreetly to Lady Ilalani. "Thought you should see this," Vera said quietly. Lady Ilalani opened the envelope and withdrew a folded letter. Her eyes scanned the page rapidly, and a flicker of surprise crossed her composed face. This was left anonymously at the solicitor's office. Vera explained it mentions a meeting between Mr. Bartlett and someone referred to only as me. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "A new player, Thelator Red Meat. Me, where the lies bloom beneath the old oak. Midnight alone? Come prepared to speak the truth, or forever hold your silence." A silence fell over the group, broken only by the crackling fire. Miss Marple broke it gently. "The mystery deepens, but so do the dangers. Whoever is Mr. Bartlett's past us." Catching up with him as the night stretched on, Miss Marple felt the weight of Marley's secrets pressing closer. Each smile, each whispered words seemed to hide more than it revealed, and beneath the polished surface of village life, something dark and twisted was waiting to bloom. Chapter 8. Midnight at the Old Oak. The night air was cool and still, with the faintest whisper of wound rustling through the leaves. Miss Marple stood quietly near the ancient oak tree, its nailed branches casting long shadows over the damp grass beneath the limes. Nearby glowed pale nth moonlight. There, scent faint but unmistakable, had decided to follow the cryptic invitation found by Lady Elena Hargrave, one addressed to M, hoping to glean clues about Bartlett's last secret meeting. Though cautious, Miss Marple knew that sometimes the dead spoke loudest through such cryptic messages. It was just past midnight Weena figure appeared from the shadows, moving with cautious steps. A man cloaked it in. A dark coat paused beneath the oak, glancing nervously round. "Are you him?" Miss Marple asked softly. The man started, then recovered quickly. "No," he said, "but I'm here because I owe George Bartlett a debt." Miss Marble's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps you could tell me what that debt is." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small fold piece of paper. "This was part of what he gave my instructions to pass along if anything happened to him." She unfolded the note, narrating the careful script. "Trust no one but Jane Marple. The truth lies buried beneath the willow by the river." The man's eyes flicked nervously. He was terrified. "Said the village wasn't what it seemed." "Why, Miss Marple?" pressed. "Because ethics. People here are hiding more than just secrets about antiques or money there. Alliances, old grudges, and a few who would kill to keep their reputations clean." Suddenly, a twig snapped behind them both, turned swiftly to see a shadow disappearing into the darkness. Miss Marple's heart quickened at this. Was no ordinary meeting. "Be careful," she said. "There are eyes and ears everywhere." The man nodded and melted into the night alone. Again, beneath the oak, Miss Marple looked toward the river where willows bowed low over the water. Whatever truth George Bartlett had hoped to reveal was waiting somewhere beyond the reach of fear lies, and Thatherans of Marleycoom's darkest rose captor. 9. Beneath the willow shade, the early morning mist clung stubbily to the banks of the river. K. Marley, as Miss Marple made her way toward the willow tree mentioned in Bartlett's cryptic note. The village was still asleep, the faintest hint of dawn just beginning to touch the horizon with a pale blush. The world felt hushed as Eve holding its breath for what was to come, the willow's long sweeping branches tipped low over the dark water, creating a shadowy sanctuary that had long been a favorite spot for quiet reflection among the villagers. Today, it seemed to whisper secrets through the trembling leaves. Miss Marple approached, cautiously scanning the ground beneath the tree. The earth was soft. Disturbed, recently footprints, too large to be hers, marked the damp soil. She knelt down, feeling the cool moisture seep through her gloves, and began to sift through the loose earth. Her fingers brushed against something hard and cold. A small, rusted metal box lay half buried beneath the willow's roots. Carefully, she extracted it, brushing away the dirt to reveal a faded inscription for truth. Shadow. Inside, Miss Marple found a collection of letters, yellowed with agitated, neatly with a faded blue ribbon. She untied them, gently revealing the delicate handwriting of a woman named Clara Hargrave, Lady Elanina's Latonde. The letters spoke of a family scandal, a long, buried betrayal involving sacred meetings, stolen heirlooms, and threats exchanged under the cover of night. The writer expressed deep fear that the truth never see the light of day. It destroyed the Marbury legacy. As Miss Marple read, a sudden sound broke the silence. The soft crunch of footsteps approaching through the underbrush. She quickly folded the letters and slipped them into her coat pocket. Stepping into the open, she saw Inspector Vane emerging from the trees, his expression grave. "Morning, Jane." He greeted quietly. "I thought I'd find you are." "Good morning, Inspector," she replied. "I found something that could change everything." "Oh." They examined the box. Vane looked thoughtful. "If these letters are authentic, they explain a lot of Booth tensions in Malcolm. Secrets worth killing for." Miss Marple nodded. "And it means Bartlett wasn't the only one guarding dangerous truths." As the sun finally broke through the mist, illuminating the willow's swaying branches, the two realized that the past was reaching into the present, and the garden's dark mystery was far from over. Chapter 10. A portrait and a promise. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Marley Manor as Miss Marple was led into the grand library by Lady Elalina Hargrave. The room smelled of polished wood, old leather, and faint traces of lavender, the scent of tradition and secrets preserved. Lady Elenina's eyes were drawn to a large portrait hanging above the fireplace. A stern-looking woman in Victorian attire, eyes sharp and commanding. "That is my great-grandmother, Margaret Hargrave." Lady Elenina explained softly. She was a force in this village. Some say she ruled it with an iron fist. Miss Marple studied the painting, noting the faint scar just above the left eyebrow. "She looks a woman who understood power while she said." "Indeed," Lady Ellen sighed, "and perhaps that legacy of control is why some things remain hidden even today from a nearby table." Lady Elenina retrieved a small leather-bound journal. This belonged to Margaret. She said it was found after her death, hidden behind a false panel in Thelebree. Miss Marple opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, filled with accounts of family disputes, forbidden romances, and warnings to be vigilant against betrayal. One entry caught Miss Marple's eye. "The rose garden holds more than beauty. It is a symbol of both love, its good sacrifice. Those who tend it must guard against the thorns, lest the blood spilled remain unavenged." Lady Elenina looked at Miss Marple with a mixture of hope and fear. "My family has always been tied to this garden and its mysteries, but I fear we have underestimated the danger." Miss Marple nodded. "Secrets like these have a way of surviving time, and now, with George Bartlett's death, those old shadows have been stirred awake." A sudden knock interrupted them. Butler announced the arrival of Inspector Vane, who carried a sheath of documents. "I have news," Vane said. "Gravelite analysis of the substances found near the rose garden came back there. Wassa, rare poison, one that acts slowly and silently, the kind that could explain Bartlett's fear and his sudden death." Miss Marple folded the journal shut. So the rose garden was not just a setting for beauty, but a stage for something far darker. Lady Elenina's hand trembled slightly as she poured tea. "What do you think, Jane? Who among us has the motive and the means to commit such a deed?" Miss Marple took a slow sip. "I think the answer less known only in the past, but in the present, and in the small cracks between appearances as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the manor. The garden outside is until shimmer, both inviting and foreboding. The roses bloomed as brightly as ever, but behind their petals, the truth waited sharp as any thorn." Chapter 11. The Housekeeper's Tale. The morning after the revelations in Thelebree, Miss Marple found herself in a quiet corner of Marleycombe Manor servants' quarters, speaking with Mrs. Agnes Fletcher. The longtime housekeeper Menace was a stout woman with a stern face, softened only by her gentle eyes, and she had served the Marbury family for over 4 decades. Agnes was reluctant at first to speak of anything but the mundane details of housekeeping, but Miss Marple's patient questions soon loosened her tongue. "Miss Marple," Agnes began cautiously, "there's been talk in the servants' hall for years about things going on behind closed doors, things Evie weren't meant to see." Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "Leonington, you can tell me. Might help." Agnes aside, "I've seen Lady Elena's great-grandmother, Miss Margaret, in her final years, and there was a sadness about her, like carrying a heavy burden. The rose garden was always her sanctuary, but also her place of torment." Miss Marple echoed. "The family had secret alliances, betrayal stats, paid in silence. It was whispered that Margaret's husband was not the man the village believed him to be." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And did these whispers ever reach Lady Elenina?" Agnes hesitated. "She knows more than she lets him, but the family's proud. They guard their reputation." Fusilith, housekeeper's voice lowered. "As for Mr. Bartlett, he was a frequent visitor to South Manor in recent months, but not for business. Sometimes he came late at night, and sometimes he left in the early hours, looking unsettled. Did he meet with Lady Elenina?" "Sometimes, other times with the vicar or the doctor, but always in secret." Miss Marple folded her hands thoughtfully, and the servants did anything unusual the night Mr. Bartlett died. Agnes nodded slowly. There was a strange noise, like a scuffle or a sudden fall around midnight, near the rose garden. Most of us thought it was the wind or a stray animal. That's very important, Miss Marple said. Thank you, Agnes, as she left the servants' quarters. Miss Marple felt the weight of the housekeeper's words settle in her mind. The tangled web of Marley Comb's secrets was vast, and every whisper, every shadow drew her closer to uncovering the truth hidden beneath. There's chapter 12, The Doctor's Confession. The Villacourt church bell tolled softly as Miss Marple made her way toward the modest surgery where Dr. Lionel Colgrave saw his patients. The morning air was crisping with the scent of freshly baked bread and damp earth inside. The doctor's waiting room was quiet, the walls lined with faded botanical prints and framed certificates. Colgrave greeted Miss Marple with a nod, his usual reserve tempered by a flicker of Fooney's chain. I wasn't expecting a visit so early, he said, leading her into his consulting room. I thought it best we spoke candidly. Miss Marple replied, there are things you've been hesitant to say about Mr. Bartlett, about Malcolm. The doctor sighed deeply and sank into his chair. You're right, there's more to this than I've shared. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Bartlett came to me weeks before the garden tour. He was terrified, not just of his health, but of something else. He hinted at threats, at people who wanted to silence him. Miss Marple leaned forward. Did he tell you? Who knows? But I did notice he hid an old injury, something he claimed was from an accident. But I suspected us. Colgrave's voice lowered. On the night he died, I found a small puncture mark on his neck, like from a thin needle. It's subtle, but it could have delivered poison, Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. So you believe Bartlett was poisoned? It's the only explanation that fits. The doctor hesitated. There's one more thing. A few days before his death, Bartlett gave me a package to hold a small vial with a clear liquid. He said, if anything could pay to him, it should be tested. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Did you test it? No, I feared what it might contain. And where is the vial now? Colgrave looked away. It disappeared from the office. Sometime after Bartlett's death, Miss Marple felt a chill. Someone named Marley Combe was intent on burying the truth, literally and figuratively. Thank you for trusting me, Lionel, she said softly. We are closer to the heart of this mystery than ever. Outside, the village bustled, unaware. But beneath the surface, the poison that had taken George Bartlett was still spreading, hidden among the roses and whispered promises. Chapter 13. The Missing Vial. The disappearance of the vial troubled Miss Marple deeply. It was a small detail, but one that threatened to unravel the fragile threads holding the case together. Whoever had taken it had done so deliberately. Someone desperate to keep the poison secret hidden. That afternoon, Miss Marple decided to visit the surgery again, hoping to glean any clues from the staff. The receptionist, a young woman named Emily, was friendly but visibly nervous. Has anyone been in the office without permission? Miss Marple asked. Carefully, Emily bit her lip. There was Almond yesterday, a stranger, I think. He asked about the doctor and said I needed to speak with him urgently when Dr. Colgrave wasn't available. He left but said he'd be back, Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Did you get a description? A tall man, dark-haired, sharp eyes. He seemed urgent. Miss Marple thanked Emily and made a mental note to alert Inspector Vane. Later that evening, she met with Inspector Vane at the village pub, whereat chatter was subdued and eyes flickered toward them with curiosity. Inspector, she said, lowering her voice, someone is trying to erase the evidence. Literally, the vial Colgrave mentioned is missing, and a stranger was seen at the surgery. Vane nodded. Grimly Ave had a word with Constable Edwards to keep an eye out. Whoever this man is dangerous. Miss Marple took a slow sip of her tea. It's dangerous enough to kill again there. Conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. A young boy burst into the pub. Breathless, Miss Marple. Inspector, it's Lady Elenina. She's been found unconscious in the Rose Gardente. Two rows immediately exchanging a glance. Heavy with unspoken fears at the manner Lady Elenina lay pale but breathing in the drawing room. A bruise darkened her temple and her hands trembled. What happened? Miss Marple asked. Gently, Lady Elenina's eyes fluttered open. I was in the garden, near Theoden's Hope. Rose, I thought. I heard someone I didn't recognize. When I turned, I was struck from behind. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The danger was closing in the garden that bloomed so beautifully was also a battleground, and the thorns was sharper than anyone had realized. Chapter 14. A night visitor reveled. The evening air was thick with tension as Miss Marple sat by Lady Elenina's bedside in the softly lit chamber of Marlea Manor. The bruise on the lady's temple was fading, but still noticeable. A physical mark of the dagger thought lurked close. I must know Lady Elenina, Miss Marple said gently. Did you see who struck you? Lady Eleanor shook her head, eyes wide with fear. Only a shadow, a figure cloaked in darkness. Caught. I couldn't make out a face, but the voice, it was low, urgent, almost pleading. Miss Marple made a note. Did Yahoo hear what they said? Lady Elenina hesitated. They said, the truth must stay buried, or all will be lost. The words hung heavy in the air as Lady Yellen arrested Miss Marple, prepared to follow a new lead. Earlier that day, Inspector Vane had informed her that a stranger matching the description given by the receptionist at the surgery had been seen near the village outskirts, lurking close to the mill house. Miss Marple set out under the cloak of twilight, walking the narrow lanes with practice. Stealth. The village was quiet, shadows stretching long and whispering secrets. Near the edge of the woods, shape-housed as a figure, emerged from the darkness. A man with sharp eyes, his coat pulled tightly around him. Good evening, Miss Marple said calmly. The man started, but quickly recovered. Miss Marple, he said, voiced low. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. What brings you to Marley? At this hour he hesitated, then spoke with an edge of desperation. I'm the one who took the veal. Miss Marble's eyes narrow wet weak, because if its contents were discovered, many lives here would be ruined. Secrets kept for decades would be exposed. I wanted to protect those who have kept this village safe by threatening lives. The man's jaw tightened. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, and yet they have. He looked to where George Bartlett was reckless. He threatened to destroy everything. Miss Marple's voice softened at them. Why not come forward? Why cloak yourself in shadow and fear? Because the truth can be more dangerous than any lie. A sudden rustling startled them. Miss Marple reached into her bag, pulling out her compact flashlight. Wolves there, she called from the shadows. Another figure stepped forward, Constable Edwards, followed by Inspector Vane. You're under arrest. Vane said firmly to the stranger as he was led away. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Miss Marple, the vial, the threads, the garden's deadly bloom, all part of a web spun from fear and silence. And now, with the man in custody, real work of uncovering Marley Coombs' darkest secrets could begin. Chapter 15. Confessions and Consequences. Village Hall was unusually crowded that evening, the air thick with tension and curiosity. Marley Coombs' reasonings, who had spent the past weeks in whispered speculation, now gathered for what was called an emergency meetings, summoned by Inspector Vane and supported by Lady Elenina. Hargrave herself, Miss Marple, took her seat quietly near the back, watching the faces sired. Her some anxious, some defiant, many simply resigned. The arrest of that stranger had unsettled the delicate balance. The village had maintained for decades. Inspector Bain stood at the front, his voice steady but grave. "Good evening, everyone. We are here to address the recent events that have shaken Marley, beginning with the tragic death of George Bartlett." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "The man in custody has confessed to involvement in Mr. Bartlett's death, but the full truth is far more complex." Lady Elenina stepped forward. "There are family secrets long buried and fiercely protect. Secrets that once revealed could change everything." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Miss Marple cleared her throat gently. "Sometimes," she said, "the truth is not simply about guilt or innocence, but about understanding the forces that drive us to desperados." She then invited the accused man, now seated near the front, to speak. His voice was low but clear as he confessed to his role in the poisoning and the fear that had gripped him and others who sought to keep Markham's past concealed, spoke of old debts, betrayals, and a long-standing vendetta that stretched back generations, rooted in greed, envy, and betrayal that had poisoned not just village's soil, but its very soul. As the night deepened, confessions surfaced from others, implicated some seeking redemption, others driven by fear. Miss Marple listened with quiet resolve, knowing that while justice would preserve, healing was another matter. Entirely outside the garden remained roses, blooming bright, yet shadowed by the weight of what had been uncovered. A reminder that beneath beauty, darkness often lies hidden, waiting. 2. Bearfield, Chapter 16. The last piece of the puzzle, with Devlage still grappling with the shock of recent revelations. Miss Marple returned to Marley Manor to visit Lady Elenina. The atmosphere in the grand house had shifted, as if a long-heeled breath had finally been released, but not without leaving behind an ache of low-scent uncertainty. Lady Elenina welcomed her with a faint, tired smile, gesturing toward the rose garden visible through the tall drawing-room windows. "The garden," she said softly, "has been both a sanctuary and a prison now. It feels like a monument to what we've lost." Miss Marple nodded. "Sometimes the hardest part of truth is accepting its consequences." They walked slowly through the garden's winding paths, past Warden's Hope rosebush, now tended with careful hands and a cautious hope. Suddenly, Miss Marple stopped near the base of the bush, hidden beneath a newly placed stone. She spotted a small, folded piece of paper. Picking it up, showing folded, a note in Bartlett's handwriting to Jane Marple. "Thank you for your quiet courage in the end. Truth is the only rose that truly blooms." Lady Elenina watched her closely. "He trusted you." Miss Marple smiled gently. "And that trust has helped unravel a mystery as tangled as any rose's thorny stem." As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over Marley, the village began its slow journey toward healing. The shadows that had long loomed over the garden were receding, replaced by the promise. New growth, fragile but real. For Miss Marple, the case was closed, but the memories, like the roses, would linger. Chapter 17. Unseen Threads. Even as Marley combs slowly settled from the storm of revelations, Miss Marple knew that beneath the surface, unseen threads still connected to villages in subtle, intricate ways. Trust had been shaken, and some wounds, though hidden, remained raw. One crisp morning, as mist curled over the fields, Miss Marple received a letter, unsigned, but with handwriting she recognized. It was from Millicent Traithwaite. "Dear Jane, I fear there is more to uncover. The garden's shadow shave not yet fully lifted. Please meet me at the old chapel at dawn. Curious and cautious." Miss Marple rose early and made her way to the chapel, a forgotten building at the edge of the village. The stone walls were worn by time, and the stained glass windows were cracked and faded. Millicent was already there, pacing nervously. "Jane, I found something in my late uncle's belongings. Papers, statisticist, a connection between Bartlett and some of Marley Combs. Most respectably, Miss Marple listened intently as Millicent produced a bundle of documents, letters, contracts, and old photographs. These show clandestine meetings, secret loans, and promises made under oath. Millicent, said Bartlett, was not just an outsider, he was a keeper of the Ville's dark bargains. Miss Marple carefully examined the papers, noting a recurring seal, a rose entwined with a serpent. This symbol, she said, represents both beauty and danger. It is a warning and a promise. As dawn broke over the village, the two women understood that Maricom's past wasfer from fully unearthed, the garden's rose had bloomed after murder, but the roots of the mystery ran deep still, entwined in thelives of those who walked its paths every day. Chapter 18. The Secret Society. Discovery of the documents with the rose and serpent seal led Miss Marple and Millicent to one of Marley's oldest institutions, the village library, Sudine, a modest stone building with thick oak shelves and dust-laden volumes. It was said the library held not books, but the history and secrets of Devil's most influential families as they pored over town records and old newspapers. Miss Marple's keen eyes caught references to a clandestine group known as the Rose and Serpent Society. It was a secretive society, rumored to have existed for centuries, made up of village elders who controlled land, money, and justice behind the scenes. According to the Fadadicals, the society's members were sworn to silence under oath and had been linked to mysterious disappearances, unexplained deaths, and sudden wealth among certain families. Millicent shuddered. Could Bartlett have been involved? Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Or he may have been silenced for threatening to expose them. A name appeared repeatedly in their records: Lord Marbury himself, patriarch of Malcolm Manor and a key figure in village affairs. Determined to confront this new lead, Miss Marple arranged a discreet visit to Marple Manor, where Lord Marbury awaited in his study, surrounded cute by bookshelves and portraits of stern ancestors. The conversation was civil, but taught with Lord Marbury neither confirming nor denying the society's existence. His words were careful, measured. Miss Marple, he said quietly, some traditions are remained to be preserved. The Rose and Serpent Society, if it exists, protects these villages' stability. Uncovering its secrets could unravel more than just a few reputations. Miss Marple met his gaze steadily. Sometimes stability built on silence can crumble under its own weight. As she left the manor, Miss Marple felt the weight of centuries pressing down the garden's blooming rose, a fragile symbol of truth struggling to survive among thorns of power. And fair. Chapter 19. The Midnight Meeting. The moon hung low over Marley, casting a silver glow on the village's winding lanes and quiet gardens. Miss Marple, alert and thoughtful, had received an unexpected invitation. An anonymous note slipped under her door, urging her to attend a midnight meeting at the old mill house. Though cautious, she knew the night often brought truths that daylight concealed. Bundled in her shawl, she made her way through the village under the watchful stars. At the mill house, shadows pulled around the weathered stone walls. A solitary figure waited by the door, cloaked and hooded face hidden in the darkness. You came, the figure whispered. Who are you? Miss Marple asked calmly. A friend of George Bartlett, the figure replied. I have information that can end this mystery, but only if you're willing to listen. Inside, the figure revealed a series of letters and photographs, evidence of the secret society's manipulation, betrayals within families, and a final chilling confession written by Bartlett himself spoke of threats, blackmail, and Ada planned to bring the society's power into the light. As the clock struck midnight, footsteps echoed outside. The figure's voice trembled. They're coming. You must leave now. Miss Marple slipped out quietly, heart pounding. The garden's roses had bloomed after murder, but the night held more shadows than light. Chapter 20. Truth Among Thetherns. The morning sun rose over Marley with a promise of clarity, as if the village itself awaited the reckoning that was to come. Miss Marple stood once again in the rose garden, surrounded by blooms vibrant, yet tinged with the wheat of secrets long concealed. The evidence gathered, the confessions made, and the truths uncovered had brought the village to a pivotal moment. It one where the shadows cast by the past could no longer hide behind velvet petals. In the grand hall of Mariko Manor, villagers gathered for a final meeting convened by Lady Elalana Hargrave and Inspector Vane. The air was thick with anticipation, as the remaining members of the secret society were called to answer for their actions. One by one, stories were told of greed, betrayal, and fear, but also of remorse and the hope for redemption. That community faced its darkest hour together, choosing transparency over silence. Miss Marple watched quietly, knowing that justice was more than punishment. It was healing. As the meeting closed, Lady Elanina stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "The roses will continue to bloom," she said, "but this village must grow beyond its thorns. Let today be the beginning of a new chapter for Malcolm." Outside the garden, basked in the golden light of dawn. The rose that bloomed after the murder had revealed not only a killer, but its community ready to face its truth and find renewal for Miss Marple. The mystery was solved, but the lessons of Marley lingered, a reminder that beneath Ethan's most beautiful surface, the deepest truths often lie hidden among Thetherns. Chapter 21. Echoes of the past. Even as Marley took its tentative steps toward healing, the echoes of the past reverberated through the village's quiet streets and worn cottages. Old wounds thou scarred over could still ache when touched. Miss Marple found herself drawn more to the village archives, nestled in a small brick building near the green. Dust moles danced in shafts of late morning light as she carefully sifted through parish records, diary sand, faded photographs there buried beneath layers of time. She uncovered a series of letters exchanged between Margaret Hargrave and a mysterious correspondent, letters that spoke of forbidden love, betrayal, and a secret pact sworn beneath the very rose bushes now tended by Lady Elanina. These letters revealed that the Rose and Serpent Society was born not merely of greed and control, but of desperation, a group formed to protect a fragile legacy, to keep painful truths hidden from a world that might destroy them. Miss Marple pondered the weight of sack intentions. The past, she realized, was not simply a series of events, but a living thing that shaped the present, often in wacency. As she closed the dusty volume, a sense of peace settled over her. Malcolm survived its darkest night, and though shadows remained, the village was beginning to learn how to live with them. The rose that bloomed after their murder was no longer just a symbol of loss, but one of resilience, a testament to the enduring strength found even among Thetherns. Chapter 22. New beginnings and old wounds. Spring was returning to Marley in earnest. The gardens bloomed with fresh vigor. Birds sang with renewed enthusiasm, and the village seemed eager to move beyond the shadow cast by terror-sent tragedies. Yet, beneath the surface, the subtle undercurrents of old wounds and new beginnings coexisted. Uneasily, Miss Marple observed these changes with a quiet satisfaction tinged by concern. The village had survived a storm, but the scars left behind were not easily forgotten. One afternoon, she found herself walking along the riverbank near the willow tree, the site where crucial evidence had been uncovered months bare. The water glittered in the sunlight, gentle and untroubled, a stark contrast to the turmoil it had witnessed. As she stood there, Millicent Trothwaite approached, carrying a basket of freshly picked flowers. Their conversation turned to the future of Marley Combe. "We must remember," Millicent said softly, "that healing takes time. Some will find it easier than others." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed, but I believe the village's resilience will see it through later that day at the village hall. Lady Elanina Hargravine, the establishment of a community trust, a fund to support local families affected by the recent upheaval, and to preserve Marley's heritage with transparency and care today. Gathering was hopeful to voices united in a shared commitment to rebuild not its buildings, but relationships. As the sun set over the village, casting long, golden rays across Rose Gardens, Miss Marple reflected on the enduring truth she had uncovered, that beneath every mystery lies not only darkness, but also the possibility of flight. And in Marley, the rose continued to bloom bright, resilient, and unyielding. Chapter 23, The Letters That Changed Everything. A quiet afternoon. A package arrived at Miss Marple's cardigan, marked, yet heavy, with promise inside. She found a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, their paper delicate and scent faintly of lavender and old ink. The letters were from George Bartlett himself, sent shortly before his death to an unknown confidant. They revealed truths that even the village darks, Tease's secrets, had not yet touched. Confessions of regret, warnings about those he once trusted, and a plea for justice beyond the reach of whispers and lees. As Miss Marple read through each page, the depth of Bartlett's burden became clear. He had been caught in a web of deception far more complex than mere financial disputes, a network of manipulation that had ensnared many in Malium, forcing them into silence. The letters also hinted at a finale meeting, one last attempt to right the wrongs before fat intervened. Miss Marple knew that these writings would shift the course of the investigation, once more shedding new light on old shadows and offering a path toward true closure. With the letters safely in hand, she prepared to confront those still guarding Marley Coombe's fragile peace, knowing the final chapter of this mystery was drawing near. Chapter 24, The Final Gathering. Tea Village Hall once again filled with a familiar murmur of voices, but this time the atmosphere was charged with anticipation rather than fear. The final gathering to resolve the lingering questions was underway. With nearly every soul in Marley present, Miss Marple stood beside Lady Elanina and Inspector Vane as they prepared to address the crowd. The letters from George Bartlett had been shared in full, unraveling many of the mysteries that had held the village captive for so long. One by one, those implicated stepped forward, not just to confess, but to seek forgiveness and offer explanations. The air was thick with emotion, grief, relief, and the fragile hope of renewal. Lady Elanina spoke with a steady voice. Marley Combe has endured much beauty. It is our willingness to face the past honestly that will guide us forward. Miss Marple added, truth like the rose requires both care and correctly, then can it truly bloom. As the meeting closed, the villagers found themselves united, not just by shared history, but by a renewed sense of community, a commitment to honesty and healing. That promised a brighter future. Outside, the rose garden basked in the gentle light of dusk, its petals glowing softly, a fitting symbol of Marley Coombe's heart. One Piece. Chapter 25. The rose that truly blooms. The days that followed the finale gathering were marked by an extraordinary quietness in Marley Combe, a stillness not born of fear, but of relief and reflection. The garden that had been both the scene of tragedy and the keeper of secrets was now a place of solace and remembrance. Miss Marple found herself wandering there, often walking slowly among the blooming roses. The warden's hope bush stood at the center, its petals brightened, unblemished, a symbol that despite all the darkness, beauty and truth could prevail. Lady Iolani joined her one afternoon, a soft smile on her lips. Jane, this garden has been my family's legacy. For centuries, for a long time, it felt like a prison, but now it feels like a promise. Miss Marple nodded. A promise, Dad. Even after the deepest wounds, life can renew. as they stood side by side. The village clock chimed, gently echoing the steady heartbeat of Marleycombe itself. Rose that bloomed after the murder was no longer a symbol of pain, but of resilience, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. And for Miss Marple the case was closed, not just in the pages of the law, but in the hearts of those who called Malcolm Boone.